Hey everyone, FPS Chazla here, and today we're going to take a look at all the latest modern naval warfare stuff. We'll be looking at the trailer, which, God, has come out a year ago now. Didn't think it had been that long. A few development diaries, and just take a look at what there is so far in case you guys have not seen some of this stuff or would like some elaboration. And then at the end I'll share some exciting news as to why I have not done this type of video sooner, keeping up with the content as it streams out. But for now, let's just get into it. All right, so let's start out with taking a look at the trailer from a year ago. So, modern naval warfare will take place in the South China Sea. Hey, look at the square kilometerage on that. It'll start out with a Virginia-class sub, 3 different blocks, Block 1, 2, and 3, which has an impact on how certain stations look in the control center here. They do have different looks between the blocks. And if you have not seen any other content for the game, you can indeed walk around the control, switch between stations. It is utterly awesome. And just the graphics improvement is always incredible to take a look at here. Sonar display is everything you're going to see is leagues above dangerous waters. I know that might be hard to comprehend, but this will lap dangerous waters, as it were, in its capabilities. It is just so much more advanced. Dangerous waters wasn't necessarily made to be the ultimate simulator. It's kind of really just all we've had out there. But this one will go far and above what the capabilities of dangerous waters. Got our lovely Photonics mast. Oh, and yes, finally, something that we've been needing in a modern game, modern sub-game, is the incorporation of drones and such. It is a rapidly changing world, as the conflicts in Ukraine, etc. have shown. Oh, I got some, I don't even know if you noticed that, I got some Burks launching some missiles over there. Switch into an Arctic kind of thing over here. They do plan to add surface ships at a later point after the game has been released. That would be really fun. Ooh, great effects there. Oh, look at that. Astute. Astute for all the UK players out there. Something like a Burke would be incredibly amazing. Got ourselves a Helix, Russian helicopter. I mean, just look at the sea. I mean, I'm kind of taking some of this for granted, but just the improvements in graphics over Dangerous Waters are just mind-boggling. If you look at some of my recent videos and like with the parry, with the how the ocean is portrayed in Dangerous Waters is so clunky compared to some of this stuff. Another drone. Great to see. I wonder if the US has submarine launched drones at this point, because that will be definitely come into play with something like a Virginia. Oh, and then the nighttime look. Fantastic. And a Type 212. Pretty far from home, but cool to see. Pretty far from home in the South China Sea, that is. Something like an Akula will be more difficult for the developers to do. Not to say it couldn't happen in the future, but at the moment, such a thing is unlikely to happen anytime soon, unfortunately. All right, so there's the trailer. Exciting stuff. Always good to see things in motion. So let's come over here to the Steam news page for one of the developer diaries. This is back from June. Oh, God, 5 months ago. Time, man, keeps moving on. Okay, so some pictures that we've already seen in the trailer, the control room and everything. So got a listing of all the stations that you can take control of. So very similar to Dangerous Waters. I may end up having to like change my keybinds to match that of Dangerous Waters at some point. Maybe I can talk to the developers about that. Yeah, it's a good point. So if you're not familiar with Virginia-class submarines, the sonar shack is now integrated into control and not a separate room. And then control room itself is much bigger on Virginia subs because of the Photonics mast. So on classic submarines, the periscope was actually a huge constraint on submarine design. It was like one of the first things you had to choose when starting a design is where the periscope would go, because it goes like the whole depth of the submarine. And then the control room has to be above the periscope. It has to be high up in the sub to be able to get the periscope to elevate enough out of the submarine and above the water surface. But with the Virginia class, we have a Photonics mast, so all that periscope issue goes away. And that's because the Photonics mast isn't, because the old periscopes use optics. So like when you put your eye to the periscope, you're actually directly receiving the light from outside to your eye. But with a Photonics mast, it just raises up and then pipes a signal to a computer monitor, and then you can see it that way. So you don't have to worry about where that's oriented. So with the Virginia class sub, the control room is much further forward in the boat now too, but also a deck lower because you don't have those same periscope constraints. So this is all to say the control room on a Virginia class sub is much bigger than in previous submarines, Seawolf and LA included. And yeah, so here's a shot of like the commander's station here. So you will be able to walk around all these stations in the control room. It will be incredibly immersive, and VR is something they've mentioned as wanting to be a feature. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure what the implementation for that is, if it's going to be with release or added at a later point, but it is something that they do want to add at some point. It's definitely on the wish list, I will say. This is on the wish list. And we'll see. I mean, this is more of like a compliment, but like if you're like riding on the surface in like rough seas and you're standing here in the control room, everyone's going to get seasick from the VR. So be careful what you wish for. But no, that would be incredibly immersive. All right, so Dangerous Waters has much more, I'll say, cartoony representations of what stations look like. So here in the developer log, you can see what is called now the pilot station in Virginia, whereas it was the helmsman station on Seawolf and before. It's now the pilot station on Virginia. And this display here on the left is very similar to what it really looks like. I'll pop up a photo here of like what the real Virginia pilot station control screen looks like. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it is so much closer to what it really is than in something like Dangerous Waters, which wasn't necessarily meant to replicate every detail precisely, but more the functional requirements of what certain roles on a submarine are supposed to fulfill. But yeah, so then modern naval warfare here will be much more of like a study sim where everything is very, very indicative of real life. There's 3 different blocks that will be modeled for the Virginia in-game at release. 5 blocks are planned for Virginia, but it will be block 1, 2, and 3 in the game. For all intents and purposes, that's the same name as like a flight from the Los Angeles, but I don't know why those were called flights and why this moved to blocks. Doesn't really matter. There's different versions of the boat, and that's the big kicker here. So these 3 photos here, left to right, show what the control room looks like in block 1, 2, and 3. Some noticeable differences. I'm going to say the color changes in the seats are more from like a visual sense, to be like, oh, this is the different. This is a different block from like a gameplay perspective. You just get like dropped into a sub, perhaps in like a multiplayer mission, and you can tell which control room you're in based on the colors. I could be wrong on that though. Let me know if I am. You can see, yeah, the nav map has some big differences there, and it'll become more apparent in later images, but I believe here in the block 1, there's still glass cathode ray tube monitors, but then in block 2 and 3, it moves to LCD panels. And that comes into play. As you may be able to see with my mouse here, that is glare on a cathode ray tube monitor. And yeah, so it doesn't have it here over in this one, but then this one has some glare over here in block 3. So some interesting differences. And yeah, the glare does come into play, and it's there. All right, so now we have some more detail here on what the differences are between block 1, 2, and 3. So here on the left, we have the radar stations from block 1, 2, and 3, top to bottom. For block 1 and 2, pretty similar. Block 2 does have some more additions. But just off the bat, let's look at Dangerous Waters radar screen compared to this. So much more simplistic. If you come to the modern naval warfare one, so much more data is being given to you about your tracks, and this is just radar. Imagine what it'll be like on the other stations. Get some more raw output as opposed to kind of like a functionally summarized output on Dangerous Waters. I'll say that like would be more digestible for a captain perhaps, or someone in command. But this is more of the raw interface you got here. So some stuff that Dangerous Waters kind of has but doesn't always have. So stuff like CPA, closest point of approach. So your ship and another ship on a certain course and speed, what will be the closest point between you guys? And then TCPA, time to closest approach, when will that happen? And that's for the Block 1. If you pop down here to Block 2, got even some more information. So even got stuff like the course of the track. The Block 1 radar does not give you course of the radar track you're looking at, but the Block 2 one does indeed. And at the very bottom of that little display there, you can see a unique identifier for ships at sea, which is a relatively new thing. Every ship has its own unique identifier, just like your cell phone has a unique number. Things like military ships may in fact have this number, but they'll usually try and like hide that number. So just looking at the radar on the track, if it doesn't have the unique identifier number, it's like, oh, okay, that's probably a military ship. So let's be concerned about what that guy's doing more than these other civilian ships per se. And yeah, you got some other things like STW, speed through the water, how fast the ship is going. There's two ways you can measure that. It can be relative to land, or it can be relative to water. And the reason you'd want a difference there is that a water might have a current in it. So if a water has a current of 3 knots going in the direction of a ship and the ship is going 5 knots, those add together and you go 8 knots. Whereas if current's going against the ship, those subtract. So the ship going 5 knots into a 3-knot current would be going 2 knots relative to land. So a lot more detail, but it is still the radar station, so it's not going to be the most useful station, just like Dangerous Waters. Not because of anything the developers are doing, but just the nature of submarines. You don't really use radars, but a lot of this will come into play if in like a future surface ship type DLC, or any kind of surface transits that the sub must do, or port entries or departures. Yeah, cool stuff. Always good to see some more detailed stations, more true to life. And then just jumping down to Block 3, it has pretty much all the same info as Block 2, but just a completely different looking interface. It's just a newer model of radar. And then at the right here, the Photonics mass. A lot of the differences are really just kind of organizational. I believe there are some differences here between the Block 1 and Block 2 in terms of what you can display, but I'm not so sure on that front. I haven't been working as in-depth with the Photonics mass. More on that in a second. But really just a lot of like organizational differences. And then just looking down at Block 3, you can see that moved to a more widescreen aspect ratio as opposed to the more square aspect ratios of Block 1 and 2. But the Photonics mass, so you got 2 of them now. They can both be raised and both be used. And you got a lot of different modes. You got like gray mode, infrared mode, and a lot more detail on like where the periscope is facing, where the boat is facing. You can see those little displays down here. That cone that you see is showing, that is the compass superimposed onto the image you're seeing, and then the cone represents which angles of the compass you're actually seeing through the display. Looking at that night vision preview on Block 2, you can see how much noise and grain there is in it. So you're not going to get that super clean low light TV look like from Dangerous Waters. At the very bottom, you can see that amazing infrared look, how blurry it is. Infrared's, I guess it's not generally a sharp way to see things, but if something's putting out heat, you'll be able to notice it. The masts can be raised to certain heights. You don't have to put it up all the way, which is excellent. I bet for anyone who's played Dangerous Waters and wants to get above some wave heights, and kind of fiddle with that, push it up and pull it down for troughs and crests of waves. And then there will be nifty features like, since this is now like a digital photonics thing that outputs to like a hard drive kind of stuff, you'll be able to have a mode where you can have the Photonics mass raise up, do a full 360 sweep, take a photo at like every quadrant, and then just come right back down. So no more having to like rapidly try and move the periscope around in Dangerous Waters, counting out seconds in your head before someone notices or anything like that. So cool features, cool indeed. All right, and there you go. I hope you enjoy this little dive into modern naval warfare. I will also put a link below to their latest interview with their publishers conference, Matrix Games. It was a great interview. All their interviews are great. I'll publish this down below. Okay, so I mentioned earlier as to why this had not come earlier, and that is because, I forget how long it's been, but about a year or so ago, the Mastless brothers asked me to write them the manual for modern naval warfare, and I graciously accepted. What a very flattering, fantastic offer. Really happy that they came to me with that. It really means a lot to me. They're great guys. I met them in person. Yeah, a little over a year ago. It was like last September. They were in the Washington, D.C. area. We met up, showed them D.C. It's a great time. They really are great guys. And they're working hard on a fantastic game. But yeah, I've started work on the manual, so the reason I was able to talk about radar and photonics mass like this is because I've been working on these sections of the manual. It's a very fun exercise to have to write about it, because then you have to really get in depth and learn about the stations before you write down what will be in the manual. So the manual will not be a how-to guide. It's going to be like a reference. The how-to things, those will come later. More on that in the future. But the manual will be just like a reference. Not really any different than the Dangerous Waters manual. I don't think that's really a how-to per se. It really is more just like a reference. But maybe with some very basic things, but it's not really going to be a tutorial. It's a manual. So if you're like, oh, I forget what this does, you thumb to that point in the manual, and you'll be able to figure out what that function on that station does. So yes, very exciting stuff. It's an awesome opportunity. I've been cutting my teeth on the radar and the photonics mass here. Relatively simple stations, as you may be aware from Dangerous Waters. The fun stuff will be sonar and TMA. That is when it will get really in depth. Not to say these aren't fun, but we all know why we really play Dangerous Waters, for the sonar and the TMA. And then modern naval warfare eventually as well. So thank you guys for watching. Hope this was helpful to you, informative, enlightening. And I will see you guys next time. Have a good one. And as always, good hunting.